Good afternoon, crafting friends. This is Melissa from Stitching with Melissa. Today we're going to work on some of our Sparkle Star quilt blocks. It is a paper piecing project, and this pattern comes from Lori Holt with Bee in My Bonnet. And we are going to work on just constructing the block, getting it ready, prepped, sewing on it, trimming around the edges to where you get your finished block, and pressing it as well. So let's start by just kind of going over how to paper piece from the beginning. So for paper piecing, there's a pattern. So here's a pattern. It's a little bit hard to see, but you have a number 1, then you have your number 2, 3, 4, and 5. So basically, number 1 is your base piece of fabric or your starting fabric. Depending on what pattern you use, one could be large like this, or it could be small. It could be in the center, it could be in a corner, it could really be anywhere, but you go in numeric order. And when you start with number 1, this piece of paper is going to go on the top, and then your fabric's going to be underneath, and your fabric's going to actually be right sides facing down. So the back of the paper and the wrong side of the fabric are going to be touching. Some people will glue their fabric in place. Some people will pin it. For what we're doing, I'm going to just pin it kind of in this corner here. So then my number 2 and 3 are easy to access, and there won't be any pins up there. And since it's such a big piece of fabric, so I'm going to pin kind of down here for now, and I may end up moving it when we go and do the other number 4 and 5. But I'm going to show you how to put it together and to get it started, and then you do each of the corners the same way. So let's start with that. So I have my pattern. It's going to be face up, so I can see my numbers on my pattern. And then I'm going to take my fabric. This is the good side of the fabric, wrong side. So I'm going to put the good side facing down, and then I'm going to put my pattern on top of it. So I have good fabric, and then my pattern is showing on the opposite side. Going to take a pin. Here I'm going to kind of pin at the bottom edge. Just pin those two together. So now it's pinned together. So the next step, with the fabric still down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of cardstock. I'm going to place it on this line right between the 1 and the 2. I know it's a little hard for you to see, but I'm going to take a piece of cardstock and just place it right directly on that line, and then I'm going to fold that number 2 down to kiss number 1. Okay. So here I'm folding my piece of paper. So now it looks something like this. Okay. So there's a handy dandy ruler called Add a Quarter. This is the Add a Quarter Plus. It has a lip on the back side of it, which is great because what it does is when you put your ruler on here, it's going to add 1/4 of an inch onto where your cardstock and that line is, because that line is going to be a stitch line. So what you want to do is you want to trim off any excess fabric past your 1/4 of an inch, and it gets rid of bulk in your pattern. Not everybody does this. I love to do this. It's clean. I know exactly where to lay my fabric for my piece. It is amazing. So what you're going to do is you're going to kind of set this ruler on this lip with the cardstock, and it gives you a good edge. You hold it in place. You'll trim off the excess with your rotary cutter. So that is what I'm going to do now. And sometimes my rotary cutter doesn't like to work the first time. All right, so I have a little triangle. Now, some people will save these little triangles for scrap. I'm not going to save this at this time. I'm trying to get rid of my scrap stash. All right, so what you're left with is your fold and just a 1/4 inch of fabric up here, okay? So now what you're going to do is you're going to flip it over and you're going to place one of your white strips that are cut. We're going to line it up on the back side. And what I like to do is I like to flip my piece of paper back up so you can kind of see through it. And I just want to make sure, because on this pattern, it tells you here's a 1/4 inch border all the way around. So basically, I'm going to end up cutting off the excess paper, but I want to make sure that my fabric is going to be covering up. So I have a 1/4 inch of fabric, okay? So I'm just going to line this up with my paper on the back side. So here's my good side of the fabric with my little white piece. And you can see it kind of overlaps the triangle right here, okay? So you want it to overlap, and that way you know that it's going to cover up this piece, all right? So I'm going to pin right there. And I kind of pin it away from where I'm going to sew because we do not want to be sewing through pins. All right, so now the crazy part is you're actually going to sew on this 2 line, okay? So you sew directly on the line. You want to start a couple stitches before your line starts, go all the way across to where that line ends, and a couple stitches past that. And then we will take out the pin that we just put in and we'll flip the fabric over, and I'll use my handy dandy rolling little iron thing here, and we will roll the seam back until we're finished, and then we do a pressing on the block. And so join me back in just a second and we will sew that. Okay, so I have my featherweight plugged in now. It's turned on, ready to go. Again, I'm going to start. And with featherweights, you have to start with your needle in a down position. So I'm just going to kind of line it up, you know, just a hair past that line. So I know it'll be picking up a stitch or two. And then I just kind of make sure. It's hard because your fabric's underneath. So you're thinking, is this lined up or not? If you pin it good and you line it up to begin with, it should be okay. So now that my needle's in a down position for my featherweight, I'm going to start sewing, and I just gently hold the opposite end, and I'm going to stitch straight on this line. Now I'm going to go just a couple stitches past the line. Okay, and I want to bring my needle back up. Cut off my strings. And what is great about this is if you have a bunch of these prepped with, you know, number 1 and number 2 pinned together, you can actually chain piece some of these, which I have my last 6 border blocks or edge pieces ready. So I'm going to chain stitch some of those with you, but I just want to kind of show you the basics right now. So now we're going to take the pin out of this piece, and now we're going to fold this back. So it's crazy because you're going, I'm sewing and I'm sewing and I'm seeing the right side of the fabric, and then I'm seeing print on the back. It's a little goofy, but what we're going to do is we're going to roll this seam open and flatten it out really good. So I usually kind of do it with my fingers and my nails first. Then I'm just going to roll it good and flat. Here's my block. It looks silly, right? This does not look like a 6.5 inch square block, but that's okay because at the end, we'll end up laying it down, putting my 6.5 inch ruler on here, and there's perfect lines on here that we'll line it up with, and we'll cut around, and it'll be a beautiful block. All right, so that's kind of how we get those going. And then next, we're going to find number 3, get a piece of cardstock, put it on your line. We're going to fold it down over that, put our add a quarter ruler on there, cut off the excess fabric, and stitch on line 3. So let's go ahead and do some chain stitches for these other ones that I've done. So on these particular blocks, I only need to do 2 and 3. So I'm going to start. I have all of my number 2 pieces ready to go and lined up and pinned. So let's start there. And I do not have to raise my needle. I just kind of go to the end of my paper and my block here. And then I'm just going to get my next one ready to go and push my pedal and then just let it ease its way into that next block. I love the chain piecing because, you know, the prep work is probably what takes the longest, and then you can just breeze through the sewing. All right, so I am going to actually stop on this one. So here I chain pieced 3 of these together. And it does save you on thread because with the featherweight, you do have to have a pretty good tail of thread. But here we have our 3 blocks attached. So I'm just going to cut those little pieces apart. And then, oh, yep, here's my beginning threads. I just like to trim those off. If you don't, you'll end up trimming them off anyway when you go to cut your block down to the 6.5 inches square. So it's not really a big deal to do that right now. Okay, so we are going to take out our pins, finger press a little bit, use our handy dandy roller. I'm going to set it to the side. There's my next one. And it is nice when you paper piece. I just have my little bitty cutting mat here. I'm trying to redo my craft room and reorganize some things. So there's a big mess in front of me right now with stuff just kind of piled everywhere. I'm trying to reorganize it and make it a little bit easier. But I do love just these tiny cutting mats because when you're doing paper piecing, you really do need just a small area to cut because you kind of want everything right next to you. All right, so on this, I need 2 and 3. I only need the 2 because these are the edge pieces. So we have 2 on there, so let's work on 3. So I'm going to find my cardstock right here. I'm going to lay it on the line by the 3 in between the 1 and the 3. I'm going to fold it over. In some patterns, you find a line between 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 and 5. In this case, 1 is just in the center and you're building off of 1. So just kind of be mindful of that just kind of look at the pattern and see, you know, are 2 and 3 connected? In our case, they're not. So you're going off of the line between 1 and 3. All right. So here's my paper. I'm going to flip it back up. I have it trimmed. So there's 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to get one of my strips and I'm going to line it up so there's a little bit hanging over each edge of the paper. Going to pin this guy down here and we're going to set those others to the side. All right, so now here's the pretty side in the back. The print is on the other side. We have our pretty piece in the center, our number 2, and here number 3 is laying down right sides together. We will sew on the number 3 line on this side, open it up, and then this block is done besides trimming. So I wanted to show you that. And so we're going to do that. All right, so let's get this one sewn down. And if I didn't mention in my last video, I absolutely am in love with my featherweight sewing machine. It's really fun. It's small. I have a beautiful Janome sewing machine too that I may use in future videos. And it's a beast. It has lots of different stitches and, you know, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. I have my free motion quilting foot and all that on there and love that too. So I'm just going to give this block a little bit of press. So remember when you're pressing your quilt blocks, you don't want to push on the fabric, okay, and stretch it out. You want to just apply the heat and press it to really set those seams. And sometimes you have to rub, you know, like this big piece here is a little wrinkly still. I might just smooth it out a little bit, but I don't want to push and stretch, okay? You don't want to distort your fabric. Even though we haven't cut the block yet, you just want to be super careful that you're not stretching out. So I'm just going to kind of apply heat, and you just kind of move it slowly. I'm just applying, but I'm not like pushing, and stretching it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I have a 6.5-inch square ruler. I've had this thing for years, and it's been wonderful. It's great for 6.5-inch blocks. So I'm going to go on the side of the block here. You can see there's a little border right here. Well, the very outside line right here, if I put my ruler, line it up, it's going to be perfectly 6.5 inches square if I line it up with these outside lines. So I'm going to trim away all the excess around there. And this is fun because once we do this, then this block is finished. Goes by super fast. All right, so here we go. I don't have one of the fancy turning cutting mats. Someday. So sometimes I cut with my left hand, which is really goofy, but you just kind of do what you need to do, right? Just make sure we're still lined up here. Okay, so I usually just try to lift. This cutting mat isn't the greatest for me. It's kind of old, and it's not like the self-healing mat, so sometimes I have to go back and just make sure I got all my edges cut here. So looks pretty good. I just had a couple little spots. All right, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so here is our block. So we just had number 2 and number 3, and that's it. This block is complete. And so this is one of the edge blocks. So it goes like this if you were to put on the top. And then if you put on the side, it turns in. So the white is going towards the middle of the quilt. All right, so those are complete now. And I have lots of piles now of those. And so I hope that this video was very helpful to you to help you kind of get started on how you set up a paper piecing block and pattern. And I will be showing you guys how to put the rows together and, just to kind of arrange your blocks. That'll be my next video. Once I go through all of my blocks and get them ready to go, I will do a video on how to arrange them. Just make sure you don't have, like 2 red blocks next to each other, things like that, and to just lay it all out and decide, does this look good? Does this look like what I want it to look like? Because once you sew them together, you're not going to want to rip out stitches because you flipped a block goofy or something. And once I get it the way that I want it, I usually take a picture and then I'll send it to my mom, my friend Kathy, my friend Michelle, and just say, hey, does this, look good? Or do you think I need to move something around? Because it's great to have somebody else look at it with you. And then you start sewing it by row. And then once you get the rows done, then you sew each row together. And then once you get the quilt top ready, then you decide if you need to add any borders, depending on how big you want your quilt. So our next video, we will be sewing blocks together and arranging them and making sure that, that it looks good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and put in the comments below if you have any questions, and I will be happy to answer those. Have a great day.